this might give Ineos an excuse not to spend any money in this window. When a manager comes out and publicly slates his paymasters, there is only going to be one winner. He completely lost his mind in that press conference. Well, I think Kobbie Mainoo will be rejoicing. I think this has come to a head as a direct result of the tension between the manager, Ruben Amorim, and the director of football, Jason Wilcock. What happens with Marcus Rashford now? He's only on loan at Barcelona. Why has Ruben Amorim chosen now to go to war with the hierarchy? Did he get wind of the fact that maybe they've already held talks with Maresca about potentially coming in? Why did Maresca walk away from Chelsea so willingly without a payoff? I really wouldn't rule that out.
Welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation all in one place. So I am your host, Angelina Kelly, and yes, the transfer window is open. And there's been a little bit of breaking news, so it's only right that we get the latest from talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook. So Alex, thank you for joining me. First up, we've got to talk about Manchester United because Ruben Amorim has just been sacked at the time of recording. He met with Jason Wilcock and Omar Barada this morning, who told him he was being relieved of his duties. Over the weekend, this is what he had to say after Manchester United's 1-1 draw with Leeds United.
You know, even in difficult moments this season, you're always very upbeat. Obviously, just on Friday, you look pretty downbeat. Obviously, talking about transfers and systems. Can I just ask, is nothing's changed? You still feel very much that confidence from the board and everything?
Guys, to stop with that, and I noticed that you receive selective information about everything. I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United. And that is clear. I know that my name is not Tuchel, it's not Conte, it's not Mourinho, but I'm the manager of Manchester United. And it's going to be like this for 18 months, or when the board decided to change. So that was my point. I want to finish with that. I'm not going to quit. I will do my job until other guy is coming here to replace me.
So do you feel that, you know, maybe certain assurances around things about the ability to manage this team that you thought you had? Do you not feel that?
I just want to say that I'm going to be the manager of this team, not just the coach, and I was really clear on that. And that is going to finish in 18 months, and then everyone is going to move on. That was the deal. That is my job, not to be a coach. If people cannot handle the Gary Nevilles and the criticisms of everything, we need to change the club. No, guys, I just want to say that I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach. And every department, the scouting department, the sport director needs to do their job. I will do mine for 18 months, and then we move on.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Now, off the back of that, he's been sacked. It's reported that Darren Fletcher will be taking charge on an interim basis. But Alex, what can you tell us about this huge news?
Well, first and foremost, I think the club were always planning a quiet January. There was this scurrilous story doing the rounds on Friday night that they've been back in contact with Brighton regarding Carlos Baleba. Now, I spoke to Paul Barber, vice chairman at Brighton, at the Amex on Saturday before their game against Burnley, and he told me in no uncertain terms, we've not had any contact from Manchester United, nor would we want it. He's not for sale in this window. He said he's not for sale in any transfer window, but I think that may be tested in the summer. So I'm not sure where that story came from. There's been links with Conor Gallagher, but again, sources close to the England international ruled out the possibility of a move to Old Trafford in this window quite early on when I spoke to them. So for Ruben Amorim to claim via sources that he was told in November there would be significant investment in January, I'm just not sure that was ever the case. But clearly this is one of the final straws as far as the Manchester United manager is concerned, the former Manchester United manager, we should call him now, because he completely lost his mind in that press conference after they'd drawn 1-1 at Leeds. And I think the tension between him and Jason Wilcock, not just over the lack of signings in this window, but over the fact that I think Wilcock and the hierarchy wanted Amorim to be more tactically flexible, have led us to this situation. And as we saw with Enzo Maresca, when a manager comes out and publicly slates his paymasters, there is only going to be one winner. Myself and Ben Jacobs reported quite strongly on Sunday night that Ruben Amorim's job was very much in the balance, and United, I think by that time, had already made the decision they would go in a different direction. We know that Darren Fletcher will be the interim manager. He'll be in charge live on talkSPORT when United go to Burnley this midweek. He may well be in charge for the FA Cup game against Brighton as well. Who knows? We might be in a position where United are in this sort of holding pen, and Fletcher steadies the ship until the end of the season when they look for a permanent successor. I think probably they will have somebody in mind before that, but let's see.
I mean, do we have any early indications for his replacement? We know that Enzo Maresca's without a job. Gareth Southgate has always been linked to Manchester United. You've got, someone like Xavi, for example.
Southgate was more of a Dan Ashworth idea, I think, and obviously one of the reasons that Dan Ashworth left the club was because he didn't necessarily agree with the appointment of Ruben Amorim, maybe felt the playing style wasn't suited to the Premier League, wasn't suited certainly to this Manchester United squad, or indeed the DNA of the football club. And that's a phrase that I've used with you on the Inside Devils podcast a few times. I don't think Amorim's style was ever really the right fit. Oliver Glasner is an interesting contender given what he's done at Palace, but he plays this back three as well. So if they're coming away from that, you'd have thought that probably would count against him. Enzo Maresca is somebody they've looked at in the past. He's got a connection with Wilcox and Barada, the chief executive from his time at Manchester City. And I do wonder, and this is sort of putting two and two together, but I think there's some science behind it as well. Why is Ruben Amorim chosen now to go to war with the hierarchy? Did he get wind of the fact that maybe they've already held talks with Maresca about potentially coming in? Why did Maresca walk away from Chelsea so willingly without a payoff? I really wouldn't rule that out.
Is that someone who you'd like to see in charge as a Man United fan?
I think he's done well at Chelsea. Obviously won a European trophy, which Ruben Amorim failed to do. And you'll remember the meltdown that I had in the mix zone after that game in Bilbao. I think there was a strong argument for firing Ruben Amorim then because he got tactically outwitted by Ange Postecoglou. And ironically, it was the winning manager who ultimately paid the price with his job. Maresca has also won that Club World Cup. How much stock you put in that, I think, is open to interpretation. But he did get Chelsea into the Champions League last season. And he would argue actually achieved all that in a very difficult environment where the hierarchy were telling him which players he should pick, which players he had to give minutes to and rotate the squad. The only worry, I guess, would be that he's already rallied against one model and one set of sporting directors and owners. So would that count against him as far as Messrs Wilcox and Barada are concerned? Is he experienced enough to go in and manage a club like Manchester United? Are you putting your faith in another rookie? I've got to say, I don't think the list of potential candidates is that stellar. I don't think there is a standout name. You mentioned Xavi. It's been a long time since he was managing one of the elite teams. So it's a conundrum. I don't think they've necessarily been planning for this, because I think this has come to a head as a direct result of the tension between the manager, Ruben Amorim, and the director of football, Jason Wilcox.
For me personally, I'm shocked. He must have really aggravated the powers that be with his comments over the weekend. It seems a little bit hasty because on the pitch, yes, things haven't been perfect, but United are sixth and they brought players in specifically for his system in the summer. But also, if you're Ruben Amorim and you're giving a bit of back me or sack me play, you can't be shocked if it doesn't go your way. It did seem like he was coming towards the end, the way that he was talking in the press conference, even before the Leeds game. And then you've got the Kobbie Mainoo saga, the change of formation. It feels like, for me, maybe Ruben Amorim never really managed to do what he wanted to do at United. And maybe we'll never actually know whether it was because he wasn't backed well enough, or whether the players weren't good enough, or whether, it was just Amorim himself that wasn't good enough. But I think it's sad. It's sad for Manchester United fans because suddenly, once again, you're back at square one, you're back on the merry-go-round again, you're starting from scratch, and Manchester United again haven't been able to get it right post Sir Alex Ferguson, and to their rivals, they're once again a laughingstock. And I'm sure some Man United fans, if Enzo Maresca is the replacement, the fact that he was, reportedly talking to Manchester City, I'm sure that'll wind a few people up. But again, you mentioned the hierarchy. Where does this leave them? Because we've had 2 seasons. Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada have now given contracts to 2 managers, sacked them both. Surely they have to be taking some criticism here. It's not just from fans and pundits, but from Sir Jim Ratcliffe too. Should their decision making around Ten Hag and Amorim be seriously scrutinised.
Yeah, because I think they kept Ten Hag in situ for too long. Gave him a new contract and then fired him. You've got the Dan Ashworth debacle where we're told he's the best in class. They paid a lot of money to get him out of Newcastle and he doesn't last longer than 5 minutes. And now you've got this Amorim situation. As I say, I think there was a strong case to relieve him of his duties at the end of last season. They didn't. They've spent money on the squad, largely on players that suit a certain system. And I would imagine whoever comes in next will tear that up and start again. So I think there's definitely scrutiny at the doors of Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada and Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But in terms of Amorim, if you're going to come out and say back me or sack me, then you need a few more wins under your belt. He lost.
True.
He failed to win more than half the games that he had in charge in all competitions, and that simply isn't good enough for a Manchester United manager. So I don't really see why he felt so emboldened to come out and do that. But I also think it's a poor reflection on Ineos that basically the straw that broke the camel's back for them was him coming out and publicly criticising them rather than looking at his record, looking at the final in Bilbao, looking at being dumped out the League Cup by Grimsby, failing to beat 10-man Everton at home, not beating West Ham at home, not beating Wolves at home, which was an absolute disgrace of a performance. But actually, it's not about the performances so much. It's basically because of what he said in the press conference.
Yeah, it does seem it's quite sensitive souls, to put it lightly, if that's what's upset them. What does this mean for the transfer business of Manchester United? Because like you say, it was expected to be a quiet January anyway, but what will this mean moving forward? And also, were some of the transfers in the summer made by Wilcox rather than Amorim? Because I know that talkSPORT reported yesterday that Amorim preferred Ollie Watkins to Šeško last summer. So yeah, just the transfers in general.
Well, I think Kobbie Mainoo will be rejoicing, and I think now you know why.
I was going to say he's popping a bottle of champagne, Kobbie Mainoo.
Now you know why he only wanted to leave the club on loan, because as we said at the time, he felt like he could outlast the manager. I think actually that was the first sign of the cracks in the relationship from the hierarchy and Ruben Amorim, that they weren't willing to let Kobbie Mainoo go because they felt he still had a big future at Old Trafford. Clearly that wasn't going to be the case under Ruben Amorim. What happens with Marcus Rashford now? He's only on loan at Barcelona, and obviously that was a big conflict between player and manager. Could there be a scenario come the end of the season where actually he does have a future at Manchester United? In terms of this window, I think it's going to be very quiet. I don't think Mainoo will leave. I'm not convinced that Joshua Zirkzee will be allowed to leave, and I don't see any significant incoming. So I think in some ways this might give Ineos an excuse not to spend any money in this window.
Yeah, true. And I guess maybe, and I don't like saying this, especially as a Manchester United fan, but kind of like get towards the end of this season and then, perhaps take stock depending what they're going to do with the manager. And like you say, this throws so much up into the air, what it means about formations. Will Amad Diallo be going back to a winger? Who knows? Like you say, Kobbie Mainoo, and Marcus Rashford, even someone like Jadon Sancho, are they still considered lost causes? Is there a way back? I'm sure Marcus Rashford is enjoying life in Barcelona in the sun, avoiding the English media as best he can. But, it's Manchester United. It's the club that he has grown up loving and playing for. So if there is a manager that is willing to kind of take those players back into the fold and give them a bit of love, maybe like you say, there could be roads back. So I guess it's kind of a nervous time, but also exciting time. I guess we have to wait for the dust to settle as fans and, as journalists, I guess.
Yeah, but listen, this story is going to run and run. This is Manchester United, the biggest club in England, one of the biggest clubs in the world. And, this is going to fill all the back pages and all our airtime on talkSPORT, I would imagine, for several days, if not weeks to come. And, of course, they've got a couple of big games this week, which they've got to go to Burnley and win in order to maintain their push for a European place, which I know that the hierarchy there believe is within their grasp. And then they've got Brighton in the FA Cup at the weekend, which is a really tricky tie. But again, in terms of putting any silverware in the cabinet this season, that is the last chance saloon, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We've got Grimsby to thank for that. And just finally on the Manchester United side of things, what is next for Ruben Amorim? Where do you see his stock? Because he was spoken about as the next big thing, the next big exciting young manager. Could we see him get another Premier League job? Do you think he's just kind of going to disappear off, into the horizon?
Well, I thought Jamie Carragher's comments that he wasn't really fit for purpose as a Premier League manager were a little bit harsh. There's a difference between
Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought it was too
between
much.
managing West Ham, who obviously tried to sign him before, I think they hired Graham Potter, and managing the juggernaut that is Manchester United. I do think probably Ruben Amorim was too emotional at the end of the day
Mm.
to be the Manchester United manager, and obviously it was emotions in that press conference that led to his final demise. But yes, I do think Ruben Amorim has a lot to offer. And by the way, I've been critical of Ruben at times, as you have.
Yeah.
I've probably been more critical than you. But as a guy and dealing with us in the media, he was fantastic. You know, I think
Mm.
genuinely he's a good guy. He's a good football man. I wish him all the success in the future. But this appointment just has not worked out. He wasn't cut out to be
Yeah.
Manchester United.
I completely agree, and I always liked the way, I think he has started to get a little bit too emotional in these press conferences, but at the beginning I really liked the way that he spoke. He always seemed to have, you know, quite a good demeanor about him, and so yeah, I get where you're coming from. In terms of post Fergie Man United managers, where would you rank him? It's hard because, you know, is it ultimately near the bottom considering United finished 15th last season, or is he a little bit higher because this guy was honest? He genuinely said, you know, there's a storm coming, we need to try and change things, etc. It seemed like he understood the work that needed to be done. You know, he did get to a Europa League final. Where I'm struggling to rank him.
I don't think he was as good as Eric Ten Hag. Eric
Mm,
Ten Hag delivered 2 trophies
he did,
and
yeah.
Champions League football, beat Manchester City in that cup final, which probably is United's best day of the post-Fergie era.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's as bad as Wreck-It Ralph Rangnick. So
I
yeah.
don't think anyone's as
Probably
bad as
somewhere
Ralph
in between
Rangnick.
the two. Probably
Yeah,
somewhere in between the two.
I'll take that, somewhere between Ten Hag and Ralph Rangnick. He's just floating in the middle there. One player that Manchester United have repeatedly been linked with is Crystal Palace's Adam Wharton. Obviously, you know, remains to be seen what's going to happen in the summer if Manchester United could get him. But, you know, Chelsea, Manchester City, Liverpool have all been linked. According to Spanish media, Real Madrid are also considering a move. What can you tell us about the future of someone like Adam Wharton?
Well, this Real Madrid link is not necessarily a new one. I think they've been tracking him for some time, as have a lot of big clubs, not just in the Premier League, but across Europe. And I don't think it will be in this January transfer window. I think it's just too big a deal to do. I'm not sure that Wharton's actually trying to force his way out either, because he's playing week in, week out for Crystal Palace, and that probably gives him the best chance of being on the plane for England come the World Cup in the summer. But if he goes to that tournament and he plays as well as we know he can, and he gets the game time under Thomas Tuchel, then I think certainly a summer transfer is a strong possibility. Wouldn't rule out Liverpool, certainly wouldn't rule out Manchester United. We know they're going to bring in one heavyweight midfielder, probably for a club record fee, either Wharton, Elliot Anderson or Carlos Baleba. But yeah, Real Madrid are massive admirers as well.
And speaking about Chelsea being in the mix for somebody like Wharton potentially, they of course parted company with Enzo Maresca. Liam Rosenior looks set to be taken over at the time of us speaking. Is Maresca's departure going to affect Chelsea's business? What do you see happening, if anything, in January?
No, again, I think Chelsea's window is going to be more about getting players off the wage bill than necessarily reinforcing it. Raheem Sterling, wanted by West Ham and Fulham. He only wants a permanent move, and I think he would prefer to go to Fulham than join a relegation battle at West Ham, but he does want to stay in London, so that gives the Hammers a chance. Axel Disasi, wanted by Lyon and Roma, and he's someone that Chelsea would be willing to let go as well. So I don't think, even with a new manager coming in, we're going to see a mass influx of signings at Stamford Bridge.
And, you know, you mentioned West Ham there looking towards the bottom of the table, and another side who could be switching it up when it comes to the manager. We're going to have an influx of departures, it seems. They play Nottingham Forest at the London Stadium tonight, live on talkSPORT. We'll have to see what happens to Nuno Espirito Santo. But like you say, they're currently in the relegation zone. They're in this relegation battle. You mentioned Raheem Sterling there, but can we expect to see anything from West Ham in January in a bid to kind of save their season?
Well, we've seen it already. They've signed the young Portuguese striker Pablo. He'll be part of the squad against Forest in midweek. They're in for Adama Traore at Fulham, obviously a player that Nuno knows well. And as we're recording, I've just had confirmation they've also completed the signing of Valentin Castellanos from Lazio, another forward, albeit not one who scored a lot of goals this season. £26 million the fee, which I know some West Ham fans are a little bit concerned about, bearing in mind that the Championship probably is going to be where they find themselves next season. But also, a lot of these players are either being picked by Nuno in the case of Traore, or managed by one George Mendes, who of course is also the agent of the West Ham manager. So despite the fact that there is a lot of pressure on Nuno, and I know some of the West Ham board are having doubts about his ability to keep them up, it does look like he is being backed in this window.
Well, I guess that's a positive for him. If he's being backed, you'd like to think that this won't be his final week in charge. And at least they're getting the signings in. Elsewhere, Manchester City, they look set to sign Antoine Semenyo from Bournemouth. What does this mean for the forwards that they have already? Could we potentially see Savinho leave, maybe to Spurs? Could Omar Marmoush depart, as he hasn't really had many minutes this season?
I think they'll be reluctant to let Marmoush go in this window, particularly as the goals seem to have dried up for Erling Haaland. I mean, he hasn't scored in his last three. That's a drought by
Shocking,
his
isn't it?
incredible standards. Oscar Bob, I think, is the most likely departure. There's a lot of interest in him. In terms of Savinho, I do expect Tottenham to try and push that button again. They were really keen to sign him in the summer. I think he wanted to go. Obviously, they've sold Brennan Johnson. They've lost Kudus to injury as well, so they're short in that area. I think Pep Guardiola probably would sell Savinho, but it was the hierarchy, those above him, who I think wanted to keep him and give him a new contract. So let's see if that stance has changed.
Yeah, and speaking of Spurs, I mean, the last transfer window, you know, a lot of people laughing at them, particularly Arsenal fans. You know, they've underachieved so far this season. Will Thomas Frank get more money to spend? You know, they were also in for Semenyo, but obviously he chose City.
Well, that certainly seems to be the plan. And I think he needs backing because they're really short of goals. And obviously Dominic Solanke has missed pretty much the whole season so far. I mentioned the issues in the wide areas. I think he would like a bit more defensive cover as well. And the Tottenham board really want to stick by Thomas Frank, despite the fact a lot of the fan base seem to have turned against him. So, yes, I am expecting Tottenham to be one of the more active clubs in this window.
And finally, is there anything else that people need to be keeping their eyes open for? Have you got your finger on the pulse of anything else that we need to know about?
I think the big one is Jurgen Strand-Larsen at Wolves. They are willing to sell him and João Gomez in this window because, of course, they know they're heading for the Championship despite picking up their first win of the season at the weekend. West Ham were one of the clubs in for Strand-Larsen, but obviously they've signed two strikers now, so that probably rules them out. Aston Villa, intriguingly, I think, are keeping tabs on him as a potential backup to Ollie Watkins. And at the moment, I would make Nottingham Forest one of the front runners because they're letting Callum Owendo, a striker they signed only last summer, go out on loan to Frankfurt with a buy option in that deal. And he just strikes me, Strand-Larsen, as a classic Sean Dyche player, that big old-fashioned centre forward. And they need somebody because Chris Wood is injured at this moment in time.
Well, there you have it. Alex, thank you so much for all of that information, from Ruben Amorim to some of the big transfers that could be happening in the Premier League. You've been watching The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place.